Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Begin just by providing a little bit of context in terms of today and the conversation and so forth, but really want this to be a very open discussion. So want everybody to, actively ask the questions that are on your mind. We're ultimately here, and Carice has ultimately set aside the time to be as helpful as possible to this group. So please do feel free to engage and ask questions and so forth. In terms of today's discussion, based on the topics that were submitted by you all ahead of time, thank you so much for actually posing the questions and taking the time to write in terms of what was on your mind. There's kind of three core themes that emerged from all of those questions. One is thinking through, how do we identify the right career for us as individuals? The second is, how do you set yourself up for success in the workplace? And then the third is just addressing kind of the realities in terms of race and the intersection of that in a workplace setting and things to bear in mind. What I would say is for those who don't yet have a copy, definitely pick up a copy of the book. It is a much there you go. It is a much extended version that will go into a lot of details, and I think that that can sometimes be what's missing from some of what we hear is high level things that sound very inspirational, which is fantastic. But what's really helpful is to go one layer deeper and actually get into some of the details. And I think the book does a very nice job of that. So that is what we're planning to discuss today. As far as agenda goes, we'll just begin with some opening remarks. Then we'll do moderated Q&A, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end for open Q&A. And actually, since we have a small enough of a group to hear directly from you, if anybody wants to maybe unmute themselves and just share a little bit about what they're hoping to get out of the conversation today, that would be maybe really helpful context before Carice and I open up the discussion.
Yeah, and thank you guys for doing this. So, for me, I guess it's really just like I don't know, I've kind of always suffered this, I guess. Being like first generation in terms of going into like a business space and things like that, right? I never really had anyone, directly related to me that could kind of teach me how to like conduct myself, right? How in a work setting, business setting, professional setting, whatever it may be. And really just how to deal with and again, this is like a personal thing, but I feel a lot of imposter syndrome sometimes, like for example, I started an accounting internship, and it's been going well and things like that, but I still have these like thoughts that, randomly creep in my mind that you're not good enough for this, things like that of that nature. And I don't really know like how to combat it, what's causing it, and things like that. So maybe, hopefully kind of with that, identity sort of topic that we're going to be addressing, hopefully that can help me, kind of frame my thinking a little bit to try to help me overcome those challenges that I have.
Thank you, Sean. No, I
Mhm.
appreciate you sharing that, and definitely has felt very similar at stages throughout my career as well. So we can certainly touch on that today.
Question I would definitely think about, or I definitely had thought about in the past, and especially now looking at the bullet points. In terms of diversity in the workplace, just through talking to a lot of people, both like in my family, people working within the professions I want to pursue, it seems that there's almost like a bit of an unwritten line that you're supposed to not cross in between, or differing the two sides of, promoting diversity. Obviously a diverse workplace is a successful workplace, but then also not quote unquote overstepping your boundaries and becoming, the nuisance or the problem starter in whatever office or workplace that you find yourself in. So I was wondering your own experiences within finding that balance, and uh, what you can essentially do to make that experience as seamless and easy as possible.
Noah, how about you?
Hi Tristan. I'm Noah. I'm a senior at UGA or a rising senior. Thank you for hosting this as well. And I kind of want to piggyback on Sean and Obi as well. If you can, I would love this conversation to be like as real as possible with like no filters because I love the real talk. Okay, maybe some things that you did well on your way to corporate America. Maybe some things that that you didn't do on? And can you touch on also imposter syndrome? Because that's a big one for me as well. I've had a lot of accomplishments, but I still have it really bad. And then I guess my last thing is talking about like maybe having that balance of choosing a profession that you truly care about and not really going there for the money, but at the same time choosing a profession that's worth your time and worth your energy because of your intellectual ability and things of that nature.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Sean, Obi, and Noah. And for everybody else on the line, feel free to kind of plug in throughout the conversation, pose questions, ping me on the Zoom channel, raise your Zoom hand, whatever method you prefer, or just turn on your video and I'll view that as a signal as you're interested in diving into the conversation. But maybe just to kick things off, Chris, it'd be great to hear from you a little bit about yourself, your journey, what really inspired you to write the book, some of the things that you felt like was information you didn't have as you were beginning your journey, and then how, touching on some of these things that they mentioned as well, addressing kind of imposter syndrome, the unwritten rules of corporate America, and so forth. Would love to maybe turn it over to you just to share a little bit about yourself.
So good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know where people are calling. Some of you all are calling in from. I'm actually in Atlanta, Georgia right now. I just moved from South Africa. I lived in South Africa for the last decade, actually. I just moved back to Atlanta on Sunday. So I'm 3 days in America right now. So still getting adjusted to y'all's country, even though it's my country too, right? I'm from Alabama. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm from Hueytown, Alabama, which is, a suburb of Birmingham. When I have been asked this question before about how to kind of describe my life, I say the first pretty much, I would say 22 years of my life could be covered in 4 themes. It was education, music, spirituality, and now I'm missing the 4th one. What am I missing? Oh, family. So I come from a very close-knit family. We've always really stressed education. Like my family is obsessed with degrees. And I grew up in a very, religious home. My father's actually a minister, and I grew up playing the piano. My mother is quite musical, plays the piano and organ. My grandmother sang as well. So those are kind of the big themes in my life. I think connected more so to the book was just, like I was saying, this hyper focus on intellect and getting degrees, right? And so the message to me growing up was all you need is your brain and these pieces of paper, and voila, success will be yours. And Tristan is laughing because he knows how foolish that is now, right? And I'm laughing because I also know how foolish it is after working for a little over 20 years, right? And so I think that was one of, the biggest disappointments when I started my career, was coming to terms with the fact that intelligence isn't enough. Just having a high IQ and having all these degrees does not equal a successful career. It does not equal impact. And so, I was very despondent, very discouraged, very frustrated. I mean, I even talk about on the first page of my book, I'll give you guys a little sample for those of you that don't have a copy, is that I can remember being so miserable in my first job that I wanted to get into a car accident. And I didn't want to die. I wasn't suicidal, but I was like, I just need a break from work. I just want to break my right arm so I can't write or type, In my 23-year-old mind, that was, I didn't need just a vacation. I needed things to just stop because I was so unhappy. And fast forward, I moved to South Africa in 2011. I started working at McKinsey as a professional development manager. So just the way that McKinsey is structured, HR does benefits, administration, and payroll, and professional development managers do everything else related to people. So I was staffing people on client engagements. I was running reviews. I actually ran a leadership development program while I was there. And I realized, wow, these young people are just as miserable as I was, and just as clueless on some levels as I was, 14 years ago when I came out of undergrad. And so that's really where the spark for my book really was lit, was I thought, what is it that I could share so that these individuals could make new mistakes and not the same ones that I made in 1998. Because I feel like if every generation starts from zero, we're never going to get anywhere. If you know, I feel like I need to share what I know so that you all are 10 steps ahead. And then you all can share with the next generation. So they're 20 steps ahead, right? And so that's what I've really tried to pour into my book. You know, I really wanted the book to be, you know, a way to help you all know yourselves more deeply, because I'll be honest, I did not know myself. I hadn't even started really learning who I was, and probably until I was at business school. And that's when I took this class my second year called Career Development and Self-Assessment. And that was the first time. I think I was probably 28. I'd been working like 7 years, and that was the first time I was really starting to ask myself some very deep questions about who am I? You know, what types of patterns have I seen in terms of how I make decisions? What are, you know, my values? What's important to me? What am I trying to achieve? What is my aspiration? I had never really asked myself those questions, and no one else had really asked me either. I think people just assume because you're smart, you know, and you're able to keep a job that you know what you're doing. But I had no clue. And I realized, you know, like I said, when I started working at McKinsey, because I'll be honest, when I graduated from undergrad in 1998, the internet was in its infancy, shall we say. It was, you know, it was on the first page. It was on the first 5 pages of the internet, right? But you all have so much information. And I just thought, I assumed that you all would know so much more. But the problem is you don't know what you don't know. So you don't even know you should be looking. And so that's why I've written this book, to say, guys, here's where you should be looking. I don't propose to give you all of the answers, but I feel like I give you a lot of questions that you should be asking yourselves so that you can figure out what's right for you. Because nobody knows what's right for you except you. You're the only person that knows the vision that, you know, the creator has put inside of you. I'm a faith-based person, so if you hear me, you know, reference that, I won't make this a revival, I promise. But, you know, you know what vision has been put inside of you. You know what is important to you. No one else knows that, not even your parents, right? Not even the people sometimes who are closest to you and love you the most. You have that vision. You know what your values are. You know where you see yourself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And even if you don't have a very specific answer, you still have some sense of how you see yourself and what you want to see yourself doing. So you have to make decisions based on that. So I just want to, you know, encourage you. And some of those decisions won't make sense to other people. Other people will, even me, when I moved to South Africa, so many people thought I was out of my mind. And I was moving there because my husband lived there. But people were like, "Are you crazy? Like, what are you doing? We don't do this. We don't move to foreign countries. We stay kind of in the Alabama, Georgia region." You know, and so, but it, you know, obviously it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I grew tremendously. So I just encourage you all, you know, sometimes you will make decisions that only you understand, and that's okay too. But kind of just back to my book, the way that I've really tried to structure it is I talk about knowing yourself, knowing other people, knowing your environment, and then trying to integrate the knowledge of those three to build a personal brand and a communication style that allows you to have maximum impact. And so what I want people to get out of the book is I want you to know yourselves more fully. I really want you to start investigating your own story, all of the experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, the people that have shaped you into who you are, and how are those experiences and those people impacting how you show up today? How are they impacting what your perspective is? Because you bring that into work, right? I think the second part is around knowing other people, how to get along with people who are different than you, how to get along with people who don't bring the same maybe IQ that you bring. How do you respect those people? How do you learn from them and embrace those differences? How do you deal with conflict? Many of us have never been taught how to deal with conflict, how to deal with tension. And I even say in my book, like, I have an older sister and a younger brother. Now we share DNA. We have the same mother and father. We grew up in the same household, grew up with the same values, but we don't get along sometimes. So you can just imagine when you go to work, you're with people who you don't share DNA, you don't share values, you don't share upbringing. So of course you're going to have tension. That's all part of the process. And so how do we deal with that in a constructive and productive way so that we can continue to work together? Understanding the third part is understanding that environment. You know, I mean, I worked at McKinsey for almost 4.5 years, but I also did contract work for Bain for a couple years after I left McKinsey. And even though those two organizations are both management consulting firms, their cultures are very different. So the way that you operate at McKinsey does not work at Bain. And the way that people operate at Bain doesn't work at McKinsey. So you have to figure out, how can I show up in an authentic way that works in this environment so that I'm still able to have impact and be successful, whatever that means for you, right? And so, once you kind of integrate the knowledge of these three, so you're like, I know who I am as a person and how I want to show up, what's authentic to me. Because what's authentic to me might be different than what's authentic to Tristan or Noah or Alexis, right? So we have to figure out what is authentic to me. How can I work with other people in this environment in the way that this environment, requires that I work? And then how do I develop a personal brand that speaks to who I am? How do I communicate in a way that is effective in this organization, but is also authentic to who I am as a person? So I'm very big on authenticity. I'm not gonna, I don't use phrases in my book like, fake it till you make it, or, be two different people. I don't believe in that, because I think it takes too much energy and it's not sustainable. So I'm trying to help you all think about, how can I be authentic and true to myself, true in my relationships with others, true in this environment, in a way so that I show up every day in an authentic way. I communicate in an authentic way so that I can build relationships and have impact. And I'll just add one other thing. I think I also interviewed 30 successful Black leaders from all different types of industries. So I've got people in here from private equity, from different financial service areas, consulting, entrepreneurship, nonprofit, healthcare, beauty, all these different, a couple of entrepreneurs as well. So all different spaces also sharing their advice in terms of how to be successful. So I wanted to and these are people who are from all over the diaspora. So these are not just Americans, they're not just Africans, they're people who may have been born and raised in Africa, but were educated and worked in the US, or vice versa, right? So just trying to share with you all just some different perspectives, not just my own, so that you can see that I think a lot of these principles are quite universal in terms of what it takes to be successful. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's a very helpful introduction. And I think that the principles and the accessibility of the principles is one of the things that makes it a really practical read, and the practical kind of insights and so forth. I'd love to hear, though, how do you develop the confidence to basically do some of these things that I imagine people on the line might know that it's the right way to think, but actually pulling the trigger there might be more challenging? And you referenced the fact that, especially as minorities, I think we do have a tendency to cling on to degrees and external validation for very deep-rooted reasons. And so it's not an easy thing to just flip on confidence. What Sean and Noah had mentioned around imposter syndrome, but really when you're making this decision around your career path, how do you actually focus on the things that you want to do, as opposed to going down that route of credentialing yourself, which could be a lifelong journey unless you decide to kind of pursue your path. So would love to hear, I guess, thoughts on that.
I think one of the things, and I talk about this in my book, I think there's a couple routes to be able to do that. I think the first one is to really evaluate your own story, because honestly, when you talk about building a personal brand or making decisions about your career, a lot of us are driven by our own personal stories in terms of what's important to us, where our passions lie. Sometimes I've even heard somebody say, ask your parents or whoever your guardian was, what were you doing when you were 7 years old? What were you interested in? I will tell you, for myself, I love to read and write, but somehow along the path, I ended up with 2 degrees in business because people told me you need to do something where you can make money. But where have I ended up? Writing a book, right? So I think some of it is just maybe asking people who knew you when you were really young, what did you enjoy doing? I think, looking at your story. You could do that tonight, guys. You could sit down tonight and just reflect on who am I? What are the decisions I've made? What are the things that have shaped me? What are some of the things that really irritate me, or problems that I want to solve, or things that I'm more curious about? I think those are some free ways to do some things. I mean, if you want to spend a little bit of money, there's so many assessments out here that are also really helpful, that I wish I had taken when I was maybe even in high school or university, because that gives you a window into what are my strengths. And what you all, there's a certain test called the Clifton Strengths Finder. It costs like $30 to take. I don't know what that is in pounds or euros or wherever people are calling in from, but it's like $30. You can get your top 5 strengths, and it just gives you, I think, a really good sense of where are my areas of distinctiveness, because that's what you want to be. You all want to be distinctive. You don't want to be average. You know, you don't even necessarily want to be above average. You want to be distinctive. And so when you figure out what those strengths are, then you can start to think about what are the kinds of careers that would really draw upon these strengths. And the other thing that I really love about Strengths Finder is that I've gone through that class probably 8 or 9 times. I've never seen 2 people with the same strengths in the same order. So the likelihood that you would have the same order of those same strengths is like 1 in 35 million. So it just speaks for me from a scientific and data, backed perspective, that you are special, you're unique, and your strengths should give you confidence, because out of your strengths comes a very unique perspective too. It's not just, oh, I'm able to do this. It's also, I'm able to see this. And sometimes if you think about it, right, you walk into a situation, or you see something on the news, right? And you're like, doesn't everybody see what the problem is? It's very clear to you, right? Other people don't see that. That's your strength. That's your source of distinctiveness. So I think looking at those kinds of assessments are also really helpful to help you figure out what is my path. Where can I uniquely add value in whatever space that I'm in, right? But I think the other part of it also is just figuring out what's important to you. Because I know, and this is based off living in South Africa for the last 10 years, there are a lot of people who are first generation college graduates, and they have to support their families. So the financial aspect is real. It's not a nice to have, like they've got to pay their sister's school fees. You know what I mean? So if the financial aspect is important to you, then you got to think about, okay, let me rank what's important, and then let me try to evaluate opportunities based off of that. The other thing I will say, because I mean, Tristan told me a lot of you all are still in university, is, I know a lot of times we think, oh, the purpose of university is to get the piece of paper. And that is true. We want to get the piece of paper. We want to graduate. But I think what's even more important in university is to use this as a time to be curious and talk to different people in different industries. And, it's a zero risk proposition, right? Because you're not asking people for a job. You're not asking people for money. You're like, can I just have 30 minutes of your time to talk to you about what you do and what you like about what you do, what you don't like? How did you upskill yourself? How did you get to where you are? What's the next level? All of these things, right? Have conversations, talk to people in all different kinds of spaces, even spaces you don't even think you'd be interested in, to figure out, is this something that I would like to do? Because I think college is a great time to be able to figure that out and to have these conversations before you make a commitment into a certain space. So those are just some of my thoughts, I think. And here's the other thing I will say about confidence. And I talk about this in my book too, because I think sometimes a lot of us struggle because we're like, ooh, I don't want to be arrogant. So we kind of dim our light because we don't want to be arrogant. But the thing with confidence is, confidence says, I know what I'm good at, but I know I'm not good at everything, right? So that confidence allows you to kind of stand sort of, sure-footed in yourself, but it also allows you to know I don't bring everything to the table. So it opens up space for other people too. And it invites other people in. So you're not repelling people by saying I'm confident. You're saying, I know what I know what I bring, but I know I don't bring everything. So what do you bring? And let's bring that together so that we can, achieve whatever that ultimate goal is.
Thank you. And so you kind of speak about self-awareness as a pillar, almost a step that will help you build that confidence and also help address some of that imposter syndrome that we're speaking about. And not only is the self-awareness helping with that confidence, but also on the point of how do you go about choosing something and a topic that you really care about and that's worth your investment of time? Self-awareness, of course, understanding what it is, in your case, knowing that as a child, you love to read and write, and that has resulted in many years later writing a book. So what I'm really hearing, and I think is a helpful takeaway for the audience, is around the self-awareness and so forth, which I
Yeah.
think also plays a role. And you mentioned that the third part of your book touches on understanding the environment that you're entering, which
Yeah.
is really big, because I know I've heard you speak about the fact that, when you're one key difference between college versus the working world is the role that relationships play. And you don't necessarily need a relationship with your professor. I mean, this is something you talk about. You don't really need a relationship with your professor to get an A in a course. You do need a relationship with your manager to get the equivalent of an A from a professional perspective. So could you speak about, and so much of this is going to revolve around relationship building. So could you speak about how you think through the actual relationship building in the context of understanding that workplaces? So, how you use relationships to understand what are the unwritten rules of McKinsey. How do those vary from Bain? And so could you talk us through, I guess, the role that relationships play there?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I use this analogy in my book. If I were to come to your house, Tristan, to visit, right? And then I suddenly, need to use the restroom. I'm not going to wander around your house trying to figure out where's the bathroom. I'm going to ask you, Tristan, where is the bathroom? And you are going to show me where the bathroom is. I think we have to take that same attitude when we walk into, an organization and its environment, right? Why am I trying to figure it out on my own? Why am I guessing or assuming that I know? Instead, I'm just going to ask. I'm going to ask you, what does success look like here? When you think about the people that are high flyers here, what is it that they've done? When you think about the people who didn't make it here, what did they do? What are some of the words that are no-nos in this environment, or types of behavior or attitudes, right? And I think when you build relationships with people, they will take the time to invest in you, to tell you those things and to help you navigate that space successfully. But I think a lot of it goes back to understanding your own personal story and some of the messages that we've gotten, right? Because a lot of us have gotten that message of, go to work, put your head down, work hard, put in the hours, and you'll be successful. Or you have to work twice as hard to get half as much as certain people, right? But I think if you listen and think about that advice, nowhere in that advice does other people factor into it. Everything about being successful in those pieces of advice is a singular effort. It's all about me as an individual. So I think even, reflecting on what's the advice that you've gotten from other people about the importance of other people in terms of you being successful is really important for you to unpack. Because I'll be honest, like when I started working, I didn't think people were important. I was like, all I need is my brain and these pieces of paper, and I'm set for life, right? That's all I need. So, if when I didn't have some of those relationships, I didn't even think it mattered. I mean, I
Mhm.
literally looked at my manager like she was a professor. I was like, oh, she's just going to grade my work. That's what my 22-year-old mind thought, right? As opposed to, no, this woman needs to know me. She needs to know me as a person. She needs to know what my aspirations are, how to coach me, how to give me feedback. I need to be able to understand what she's trying to achieve and how that fits, how what I'm doing fits into that. I need to know her as a person, the best way to communicate with her, because the better that relationship is, the better our working relationship is going to be. And the worse that relationship is, the worse our working relationship, and
Mm.
ultimately the outcome is, or whatever it is that we're doing together, is not going to be nearly as good as if we had a better relationship.
Mhm.
And so I think, the more you can build those relationships, the more people will want to invest in you and tell you where the bathroom is, as opposed to them just letting you figure it out on your own.
Mhm. And so I'm hearing, I guess, the importance of observation, and when you're first stepping into an environment, really taking a step back and observing and listening, and really as a way of gaining a full picture of the nuances within a particular organization or a particular setting. I mentioned that when some people kind of do this observation, there's a lot that they will pick up on, which will be helpful in terms of navigating an environment. But there's also a lot of heavy stuff that they might pick up on, especially as a minority, in kind of navigating your way through the workplace. So just want to maybe address, I guess, the reality of challenges that some minorities may face in the workplace and your advice for remaining focused in the midst of it. So maybe how would you encourage people when they face, whether it's microaggressions or if they face uncertainty in terms of how to discuss some of what's happening in the broader world with
Yeah.
their managers that may be from different backgrounds? How would you advise that people balance that understanding and the heaviness of the challenges that they might face with the practicality of navigating the workplace in a successful way?
So I'll say that the first thing, and I mentioned this, in my book, is just figuring out what is your why. Like, why did you choose to come to this organization? What is it that you want to get out of this experience? Is it certain relationships? Is it certain skill set? Is it working in a certain geography, right? Or certain experiences? Because I think that will help you make peace with some of the sacrifices that you might have to make. And I'm not necessarily saying that you need to take, microaggressions on the chin and not say anything, but I'm talking about sacrifices kind of in a broader sense. Whether it's working late nights or giving up time with family and friends or working on the weekends, whatever it is, right? So establishing that why, because there's always going to be things that people are going to say and do that will be a distraction for you. But I think having that kind of North Star in terms of, I'm not leaving this place until I get what I came to get. And no, person who is, treating me in a poor way is going to get in the way of that if it's important enough to me, right? I think in terms of addressing, microaggressions or any sort of like tension and conflict, I think we do have to pick our battles. Because, I think, as I can't remember who mentioned it, but as a minority, it is easy for us to get labeled as, that the activist. You know what I mean? And you don't necessarily want to have that label, I think, especially early in your career. I think, you want to be able to prove yourself. You want to be able to perform because then you have more of a platform to be able to bring these things to people's attention, as opposed to if it's day one and you're bringing these things up, right? Because people are looking at you like, who are you? You know what I mean? So you want to have some credibility in the space, I think, is number one. I think number two, one of the things we talk about at Korn Ferry is this concept of having a strategy to be able to address some of these comments that people might make. And so, we'll often talk about this concept of a fighter. So somebody who's a fighter, they're right in terms of what they're saying, in terms of the content, but it's just the approach is all wrong. And so that approach it's combative. It really disengages people on the topic. And that's not what you want. You want to get people to engage on the topic. You know what I mean? So you want to take more of a stance of trying to coach people. And I know some people are turned off by that idea, like, oh gosh, I've got to be your like diversity and inclusion trainer now. But I think if we want to address these things, we've got to do it in a certain way. So we often talk about this strategy called plus minus delta. So we'll basically, that framework is really helping people to kind of start off by saying, okay, I hear what it is that you're saying, but this is the kind of the impact of what you're saying. And here's how you can think about maybe saying it differently, or maybe not saying it at all, right? So it is about having a strategy to be able to address some of these microaggressions or some of these comments or this non-inclusive behavior that you might see. But you want to do it in a way that you're coaching people and that you're engaging people on the topic and not just chastising people and repelling people and disengaging people on the topic. So that's just kind of some general advice. And like I said, you got to figure out which battles are worth fighting and which ones you want to let go. And I think that's like in any relationship, right? You want to figure out what am I willing to stick my neck out for, right? Which hill am I willing to die on? versus the ones you're like, you know what, it's not even worth it. I'm just going to let that go and move on, right? So figuring out which ones are important and which ones you want to let go. And then, like I said, having that strategy and being able to kind of engage people on the topic, you know, in a productive way, I think is important.
Thank you. Being mindful of time, I want to leave a lot of time for questions, and I start to see some of them rolling in that I think will be good for everybody here. So, Alexis, maybe I'll turn it over to you in terms of your question around balance.
Hi, my name is Alexis Cathcart, and I'm a rising third-year student at North Carolina A&T State University. My question is, what are some strategies to develop a work-life balance in both your collegiate and professional careers?
It's a very good question. So I think, you know, you'll hear different people say different things, right? Some people will talk about, you know, time management. Some people will talk about energy management. People talk about boundaries. I do think it, you know, and I talk about this in my book, right? You figuring out what are the things that are really core to who you are and being able to show up in the very best way. Now, I do think I don't know if you can have a list of like 10 things, right? I think you might have a list of like 3 to 5. And so you got to ask yourself, what are those things that are core to who I am that really will impact me being able to show up in the best way? And then trying to make sure you create space for those things. But also you got to look at how your organization works. So I can remember being, you know, at McKinsey, and there was this consultant who said, you know, I really want to be at home every day to have dinner with my girlfriend at 6 o'clock. And I just looked at him like, brother, you have come to the wrong place. Like, that ain't gonna happen, right? So I think we've got to be reasonable in terms of what we're asking for, so that it doesn't disrupt the operating model or how the team works, right? And I think the other thing about it is you got to make sure you're performing really well. Because if you're not performing well and then you come to your manager and you say, yeah, well, you know, I really want to leave at 6 o'clock or 5:30 on 3 days out of the week, that person's going to look at you like you're not even doing well. You know what I mean? But if you're doing well, I think it gives you the license to be able to say, you know what, can I come into work a little bit later so that I can go to the gym in the morning? Or, you know, a couple of days a week, can I leave at this time so that I can go and do whatever it is that's important to me? You know what I mean? So you got to make sure you're delivering on what you need to deliver on. You're performing at a high level, and that gives you the space to be able to ask for some of these things that you need to be able to show up in the best way. And I think couching it like that, you know, I've said to managers, look, if you want me to show up in the best way, I need X, Y, and Z. So I think, and no manager wants somebody that's not going to show up in the best way, right? So I think couching it in that way is really helpful for people and helpful for managers to say, okay, how can we make this work? But you got to be willing to compromise. And I think the other thing is knowing what your why is, you know, because that, like I said, that helps you make peace with some of these sacrifices that you might have to make, especially early in your career. If you know what, I'm sacrificing a little bit of my free time. Maybe it looks like it's just for this company, but ultimately it's to serve me. It's to serve Alexis. Right. And that helps you say, okay, I'm gonna make this sacrifice because I know it's ultimately serving me and what I'm trying to accomplish and what I want to get out of this experience. So I think that's important for you to establish for yourself too. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Awesome. Amanda, maybe I'll turn it over to you. A friend of mine from college. I think the question around mentorship and sponsorship will be really relevant for a lot of people. So, and Carice, I know this is something you have a lot of thoughts on. So, Amanda, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tristan. So, hi, Sharice. This is Amanda Henry here. I'm about 7 years out of college, currently work as a sales enablement training facilitator over at Google. Very passionate about this area and just helping to empower like our next gen leaders with kind of the blueprint, the unofficial blueprint as it relates to thriving in the workplace. So really thankful for the work you're doing. My question is something that I get a lot from my mentees, and so I'm sure folks here would really resonate, which is, can you help define the difference between mentorship versus sponsorship, and even provide some strategies that folks can think about early in their career to start to build those relationships? If I think back to my own time in internships and things of that nature, I wish I fully grasped this concept early on. So I would love if you could share with the group here.
Sure. So I think, mentorship versus sponsorship is just something we really need to clarify, because I hear a lot of people of color talking about mentorship, but not enough talking about sponsorship. And maybe I think that probably even extends to other underrepresented groups, not just people of color. But mentorship, you can get mentorship from anybody. You could get mentorship from somebody who works at another company, somebody who's more junior to you but has been at the company longer than you. And it's just really somebody who's giving you advice and sharing wisdom and talking about their own journey and the decisions that they've made. That's mentorship. Sponsorship has to come from someone senior in your organization who has what I like to call juice. So they've got influence. They don't just have a title. So when these people speak, other people listen. They have to be in the room when the most important decisions about your career are being made. So those are decisions about promotions, raises, step up opportunities, bonuses, right? They are in the room, they're advocating for you. But the thing is, they need to know, like, and trust you before they're going to stick their neck out on the line for you. So mentors can be requested. So I can come to you and say, will you be my mentor, Amanda? Sponsorship has to be earned, because nobody's going to put their neck on the line for someone they don't know and who I don't know anything about your performance. So I think the thing with sponsors is you just got to put yourself in their line of sight. So, if you're not working on a project with a sponsor, maybe you find out some project they are working on, maybe you volunteer, give a couple hours. If there's some sort of extracurricular project going on at work, volunteer your time to participate in that. Do something so you get in front of that person and demonstrate that you are a person that has potential. You're someone who takes ownership. You deliver a high quality product. And then I think you can start to build that relationship. For me, if I had a choice between having a sponsor and having a mentor, I would rather have a sponsor. They're going to open up doors for me that I can't open up for myself, because I'm just not in those rooms where a lot of those decisions are being made. So I think people need to really assess, do I have a sponsor? And you need to have multiple sponsors, because that if you only have one, that one person could leave the company and then what happens to you, right? So having multiple sponsors is also really important. And cultivating those relationships and trying to make those relationships give and take. Don't just think about what you can take from the person, but also what you can give. And like I said, that could be, your discretionary time. It could be, hey, I saw this article and I thought it would be interesting to you. Just something so that you're making that relationship mutually beneficial to, and not just calling on that person when you need something. But that sponsor relationship is really important. That person also will provide cover to you when you take risk, when you make a mistake. They're going to still vouch for you, right? Because they'll say, hey, I know Amanda. This is a blip on the screen. Let's give her another chance, right? So and I think it's critical in terms of advancing in a company. Because the more you advance, it's less about your technical skills and more about your ability to build relationships and influence other people. So you need to be cultivating those relationships, and especially with that sponsor.
Incredible. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
That definitely resonates. And one thing I'll say, I think in some instances, I've seen that mentor relationship evolve into, somebody gets to know you so well that they can then over time become your sponsor and can really open up doors. I've seen that happen a handful of times. And even, I guess, I think about this morning, I got a phone call from somebody who I've known since this person was in high school. And he just got into Harvard Business School for the 2+2 program. I wrote his letter of recommendation. So I've done a lot of volunteer work alongside him. And so I think it's a good example of somebody you can elevate these from basically mentor to sponsor to hopefully maybe even taking it a step further where you can become almost like a trusted advisor to the individual, and they start to see you as somebody who, maybe they value your perspective because you have a pulse on what people 15, 20 years below them might be thinking. And that's helpful for executives to be able to have that so that they don't have blind spots. So I think that these relationships don't necessarily have to be rigid and can certainly evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sponsors can end up providing mentorship, but like you're saying, I think mentors can evolve into sponsors as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So just mindful of time, I'll pause here. Are there any other questions? People can feel free to unmute themselves on the line and dive in. Jackson, I see your hand is raised, so maybe we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, yeah. Thanks, Tristan. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks for doing this. I'm dialing in from Singapore, so I'm not sure if any of you have any context, but Singapore is kind of like a tiny island south of Malaysia and kind of a little bit racially diverse. So we were brought up being taught about racial harmony and being sensitive to other races and also celebrating the nuances and celebrating the public holidays of other race. So I'm kind of like, I've graduated for about 6 years now and work in a couple of industries in consulting and managing my family business. So I'm thinking about going to the US to pursue an MBA. But I think one of my concern, or rather one that I would like to clarify, is what are some of the challenges that you might face as a minority in the US? And because I think you also talk a lot about culture, diversity and inclusion. So how does that resonate and how do you look at it? Yep.
That's an interesting question, Jackson. I mean, I'm happy to share my thoughts, but Tristan, you've also, been in business school, and you can tell me your experience, right? But I definitely think, there's a lot of, especially depends on what school I think you also go to, right? So, I mean, I went to Harvard Business School along with Tristan. I mean, I'm much older, but, but I mean, it's this, I think, American culture is just a little bit more on the aggressive side, right? And so I think that's something that you just will have to get used to, especially, if you went to Harvard, right? Being able to find airtime to get in when you've got like 89 other people who are really smart, who all have something to say and who are very assertive, that might be somewhat different than the culture that you've been raised in. But I think you'll find your way, right? Especially when you realize that that's a significant part of your grade, and being successful is getting that airtime, being able to speak up. You will find ways to get in. But I think, business school is such, I feel like there is such an appreciation for difference at business school too. And that's one of the reasons, I even chose Harvard Business School, was I thought, wow, I think my class was like 30% international. And this was in 2004. And just being able to be exposed to different kinds of people and hear different kinds of perspectives. I mean, I traveled all over the world when I was in business school too. So I think it is, I think the working space might be different, but I think actually in business school, I think that those differences are really embraced, and celebrated in a way that, maybe they're not so much celebrated in the actual working world as much. But I feel like I got the sense of business school that it is really celebrated. I don't know, Tristan, you have a different take on it.
Yeah, I definitely view it similarly. I think it's something that's celebrated. I will also say that in my own section, so the HBS class is 930 students broken up into 10 groups of 93. And so in my own section of 93, you had maybe 35 to 40 different countries represented. And I will say that I always got particularly excited when I saw kind of my international students raising their hand, particularly around topics that I would describe as more sensitive, if not sensitive, but if you're thinking about like diversity and inclusion, that's going to be something that is so nuanced and individualized based on the country that you grew up in and the context that you grew up in. And so I actually found that the comments that I feel like I learned the most from were from the individuals whose upbringing was different from mine, or whose experiences have been different from mine. So in this case, as an American, I really valued when classmates from Asia, Europe, Africa would raise their hand. I just knew that I was going to basically hear something that was going to be a very different view. And professionally, I would say it holds as well. So when I saw my classmates who had spent time or were coming from the military, as an example, I was really curious to hear their thoughts and perspectives, especially around topics like leadership, where they've thought about this very deeply, but in a very different context. And so I would say that the challenge you'll probably have to overcome as a minority, one is going to be, I think that there's incredible temptation or desire to feel like you might have to be a representative of your whole, whether it's your whole race, or in your case, you might feel like, there's definitely not going to be more than 10 people from Singapore in any given HBS class. It's probably going to be probably actually roughly that amount, but you very likely will be the only person in your section from Singapore. So what you'll probably experience is a little bit of, every time you speak, you want to be able to delineate between, this is my perspective as Jackson, versus like, this is my perspective as was kind of, this is, you might have hesitation because you don't want it to feel like everything that you're saying is on behalf of your country or your background and so forth, as opposed to your own. And so I think that that's something that when I've had conversations with friends of mine who are in a business school context, they grapple with that a lot because it's so intertwined with identity and relationship building and so forth. But I think that the point that Carice had mentioned earlier around confidence probably and self-awareness probably applies here, because you'll develop that muscle about being able to communicate it and convey it in a way, have your point of view and so forth. And what I will say is, I wouldn't be too concerned from like a culture perspective, because this definitely depends on the institution that you go to. But for the most part, if you're talking about a top MBA program in the US, they have incredible cultures of respect, inclusiveness, and so forth. So you won't have to worry about that in a large way in terms of your on-campus experience.
A very wide diversity of diversity of people that are being represented that we're working with.
Yeah. Carice, do you want to take that from a workplace perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad question, right, Jackson? I think it depends on the environment in which you're going to work in, right? Because if you're coming, I don't think all, because people have a very, I feel like a skewed sense of what American culture is like, and people think everywhere is like, Wolf of Wall Street, and everybody's like super aggressive. It depends on where you work. You know what I mean? But I think, every place has a specific culture, specific way of doing things, how you deliver, how you speak. And so you just have to figure out what's the distance between your culture and the culture of that organization, and thinking about how far am I willing to go, right, in order to be successful here. And what is the cost to me to, whether it's emotionally or physically or mentally, to stretch myself in terms of fitting into that particular culture. There's no one way that all, American organizations operate. They're all very different. And so that's why, it's important for you to do that listening, talking to people, asking questions to figure out, how does this place work and how different is it from my own, cultural value system as well. So I'll just have to leave it at that. But, you make adjustments, and culture is fluid. It is not a static thing, right? I mean, I've been living in South Africa for 10 years. And in South Africa, it's a big deal. You have to greet people before you talk about business. You got to spend 5 minutes asking how somebody's weekend was and how their kids are. And if you don't do that, people see you as rude. And so I've adjusted. And now when I deal with Americans who don't do that, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you're so rude. You didn't ask me how my family was, So now that I'm back in the States, I've got to kind of get used to how people do things here. But it's fluid and we're flexible, and we have the ability to flex depending on the environments that we're in. And I know you're smart enough, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, just a little feedback add up to that. I guess in the Chinese context, kind of like asking too much or probing too much, it's kind of like a little bit of being a little bit rude towards maybe the elderly or someone that's older, So for us, we tend to, maybe that's why we are, in our culture context, we tend to be more reserved. But I definitely get what you mean. But thanks for answering.
Carice, do you have time for maybe one more question?
Yeah. Kristen, I really want to address the imposter syndrome. I feel like we didn't fully close that down. So if people have an extra 5 minutes, I'm willing to stay on to talk through that really quickly.
That would be great. And Sean and Noah, I know that the two of you had initially posed the question, so maybe I'll turn it back over to you, because I agree on this point of imposter syndrome. Would love to hear, I guess, from either Sean or Noah. Do you feel like what outstanding questions might you have around that topic? Because as Carice mentioned, it would be great to kind of really close that point out.
With imposter syndrome, for me, it kind of roots back from applying to colleges and not getting into the ones I wanted to apply to. And that later led to like me thinking like, hey, maybe I'm not good enough to apply to this internship. But then me ending up applying and getting in, and then now it's coming to recruiting season for full-time opportunities, and it's still the same feeling. Maybe I'm not good enough for this, but hey, I'll still go ahead and shoot my shot. And like, if I fail, like how how will I take this failure? Like how bad will it hit me? And so I don't know, if Sean, if you were going on the same line of that or what.
Kind of, sort of, but I would still like to hear your answer to that, and then I'll give like my variation of the question.
So I'll start to answer that. I mean, I think, you know, when you talk about imposter syndrome, it has those two elements to it, right? It's feeling like a fraud, and it's when you externalize successes, right? So I think on your point around failure, you know, is because I think what a lot of times we do is we internalize the failure and we externalize the successes, you know. And so sometimes I think we need to just manage how we handle successes and how we handle failure. So in this instance, you know, if you apply to, I think you're talking, did you say internships? If you apply to these internships and you don't get them, but if you feel like I put my best foot forward, and so you focus more on the effort and the process as opposed to the outcome. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think realizing I did the very best that I could, I put my best foot forward, and maybe for whatever reason, I'm not what they're looking for, but it doesn't necessarily, you know, make me destined for failure in every area of my life because I didn't get these 5 opportunities. You know what I mean? So one of the things I loved about the Michael Jordan documentary, I forgot what, The Last Dance, is he talks so much about living in the present. He's like, why would I think about the shot that I did make yesterday when I'm about to make this shot? I'm focused solely on what I'm doing right now. I'm not focused on the past. I'm not even focused on the future. I'm living in the moment. And somebody was saying that that was probably his greatest strength, was to be present. And so I encourage you to do that as well, right? And to remember your strengths. Remember that you have a very unique set of strengths, and maybe it wasn't necessarily a good fit for that particular opportunity, but you will find the thing that is. And just to keep pushing, to keep applying. Don't self-select out of opportunities because you think you're not good enough. Let somebody else tell you that. Don't tell yourself that. So I think those are important, right? In terms of, and don't allow your emotions to become facts. That's another one. And I just remember, you know, I think also with imposter syndrome, we have this idea that people who are competent never failed. They never got rejected. But when you listen to the stories of uber successful people, pretty much all of them have had rejection. Oprah was, you know, pretty much fired from her first newscaster job because they were like, you're too black, your nose is too big, your hair looks crazy. And look at her now, right? She just had to find the right environment that could where she could maximize on those strengths. And the same thing goes for you too. So it's just a matter of, you know, figuring out where you really truly belong and where you can be distinctive.
Awesome, thank you.
So I kind of have an extra question on top of the one I had from before. So I'll address that first one. Any advice then on how to be present? Because I struggle with that myself sometimes. I will be doing work, an assignment for school, whatever it may be, and I'm thinking about 100 different things. Some stuff that's, you know, near future, stuff that's 10 years out, things like that, all while I'm trying to take care of the thing that I'm trying to do. So any advice on combating that? And also, I think it was you that mentioned the mindset of, you know, we need to work 3 times harder than we do for, you know, less than everyone else kind of thing. I had a professor when I was in community college that actually said that, excuse me, especially for minorities, you need to work 3 times harder than anyone else does, right? And I've kind of tried to ingrain that mindset in myself, but I've noticed that, you know, it's a little detrimental at times where, you know, I'm staying up super late at night doing too many classes, things like that. So I guess advice on how to, you know, reframe that mindset, I guess, into something a little bit more positive as well.
Yeah. To your first question, darn, now I've forgotten what your first, so I'll say the first question one more time.
Yeah, no, sure, of course. It's just really just like, you know, being more present, right?
Being mindful, yeah.
Being mindful, exactly.
I mean, I think there's different ways for you to be able to do it, right? I mean, people will talk about doing meditation. Like I've done guided meditations because I'm also a person who thinks so much in the future and it's hard for me to be present. But if you can just start practicing, even if you did 2 minutes of meditation, and I do the guided ones, like I've gotten one off of Amazon where the woman is talking me through it, because if I just sit in silence, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to be thinking about a million different things. But I think meditation can help you learn how to be more in the present. Sometimes what's helpful for me is if I have a lot of ideas in my head, I'm like, let me just write everything down. And then that helps me to be able to focus on the thing that I'm trying to focus on. So those are kind of my two pieces of advice for you, I think, to help you, stay in the present. And for me, it's also, you just have to discipline yourself, and it's never about maybe being perfect. It's about progress over perfection. So being present is not about saying I never have another thought while I'm in this moment, but it is about not allowing that thought to drag you off, right? For you to be able to watch that thought and to say, okay, I see that thought, but I'm putting that to the side, right? And maybe over time you get better and better and better. Maybe you never stop having some of those other thoughts, but you're able to kind of harness them and coach yourself down from getting too distracted by them. I think your second point was around, remind me.
Sorry, yeah. So working, way more than
Yeah.
is beneficial. Excuse me, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I talk about this in my book, because I do think on some levels it is detrimental. I think to put that much pressure on ourselves, what I think is more, effective is to say to myself, I need to bring my very best every time, as much as I possibly can, right? I need to put in the effort, but don't allow that anxiety to make you overwork and kill yourself, basically, right? And be so physically and mentally and emotionally exhausted because you're doing it out of fear, as opposed to, I just want to give my best. I think if we can just say, I want to do the best that I can, I want to put in as much effort as I can, as opposed to thinking about, I've got to do 3 times as much as somebody else, because we don't know what other people are doing, right? And I think it kind of even goes back to this idea around imposter syndrome. We have this model in our heads of what competence looks like, and we give ourselves no room for error. We've set the standards so freaking high, right? That we got to work 24 hours a day to be able to meet it. And it's an unreasonable standard that no one is meeting. I don't care who you are, right? All you can do is do your very best. And that's what I try to tell myself, is like, did I give my best? Then that's all I can do, as opposed to saying I need to work twice as hard as someone else, right? I just think we've got to start watching our self-talk and being able to coach ourselves when we get into that spiral and we get into that sort of panic and anxiety, because I don't think it's as helpful as we think it is. I think sometimes I've seen it paralyze people, where they, miss deadlines and don't speak up because they've set, and it happened to me too. I set this bar so high for myself that I didn't say anything because I never was able to meet that bar in terms of the insights that I was sharing. So I think sometimes we just need to relax, show some compassion towards ourselves, realize I'm still human, even though I'm a person of color. I'm still a human. I'm going to make mistakes, and it's okay. I can bounce back. None of these mistakes are catastrophic. And I think we just need to take some of the pressure off.
Thank you for that. I mean, honestly, I was, and I've noticed this a lot more in college, especially, that, I always feel like I'm never doing enough, right? So, and if I wasn't doing something, I would honestly feel incredibly guilty, towards myself, towards, society and societal pressures and stuff like that. And that really basically, like, kind of addressed every single like layer of that anxiety that I had, and if that makes sense. And I'm gonna definitely try coaching myself, because I feel like I haven't really tried that ever.
Yeah.
And that does sound extremely effective. So I owe it to myself, like you said, so I'm definitely gonna try that. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
And here's the thing, like I said, it's not about never having that thought, but it's about how quickly can I talk myself down off the ledge. That's what I tell myself. So 10 years ago, it took me a week. Now it takes me an hour. I feel like that's progress. It's not perfect, but it's progress. And so that's what you want to do, because we're very smart people, and smart people, we're dangerous to ourselves, right? We can spiral ourselves down, or we can spiral ourselves up. So choose to spiral yourself up. Coach yourself in a positive way, as opposed to allowing yourself to spiral in that negative direction.
Got you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right, just mindful of time, maybe I'll just close this out with a few reflections in terms of just some takeaways from the conversations today. So across the three things that we're focusing on, one around this idea of selecting the right career for you, really starting with self-awareness, knowing your strengths and building confidence. We've talked a lot about imposter syndrome, and I think that self-awareness and knowing your unique strengths, and I think that Strength Finder example you shared was really impactful in terms of no two people, 1 in 35 million, no two people are going to have those same set of strengths. So really knowing that can be a great first step. Second, around kind of addressing race, pick and choose your battles. And it's also perfectly okay to focus in the beginning on just establishing yourself, and later down the line, once you have that credibility within your company and your organization, you might be more well positioned to be able to tackle some of these topics that are very important to you. So I think that was an important theme. Lastly, setting yourself up for success within the workplace, beginning by being observant and really leaning on somebody to learn as much about the unwritten rules within the environment that you're stepping into. And of course, this is it's all been very brief. It's been one great hour, but yes, definitely pick up a copy of the book. I really enjoyed reading it, even to this day, but especially I think for individuals who are making that transition early in their career and trying to think about and really want some of these details. And Noah, as you kind of raised in the beginning, the real talk, which I think is definitely interwoven throughout the book. So Carice, thank you so much for setting aside the time. I'll turn it over to you in case you have any parting or final words, but just wanted to say a huge thank you on behalf of everybody for carving out the time.
Thank you so much, Tristan, for having me. Just two things I'll say in closing. I think, one of the reasons I wrote this book is I wanted to empower people. There's so much out here that's telling you what you don't have control over, what you don't have influence over. 99.9% of my book is about what you absolutely do have control over and what you can influence. So I want you all to feel empowered. And the second thing is I want you all to take ownership. Take ownership of your career, your development, your relationships, your work product, your personal brand. Take ownership. Don't wait on someone else, to tell you what to do. Ask those questions. Be curious, because at the end of the day, you might be the employee of company ABC, but you're the CEO of You Incorporated, right? So take ownership, and really try to apply these principles in your career. I promise you, you will not regret it. And really get to know yourself, ladies and gentlemen. That's that third point I will say is a lot of what, we need to master ourselves and lead ourselves first before we can lead anyone else. So that's a really important one too. And I will leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us and staying till a few minutes after the end. And thank you, Tristan, for having me too.
Thank you again. And thank you everybody for dialing in. Really appreciate it. Take care and have a great rest of the day or rest of the evening, depending on where people are dialing in from.